The sun rose over Willow Creek, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. It was a quiet morning, the kind that made people feel peaceful and content. The air smelled of fresh grass and blooming flowers, and the only sounds were birds chirping and the distant hum of cars passing on the highway. Maggie's place, the little diner at the edge of town, was already bustling with activity. Inside, the smell of coffee mixed with the sizzle of bacon on the griddle. Ale Quill sat at their usual spots, chatting about nothing important while they enjoyed their breakfast. Jake leaned against the counter, his hands wrapped around a steaming mug of black coffee. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and messy brown hair that always seemed to stick out in odd directions. His overalls were stained with grease from years of fixing cars, but no one minded. It was just part of who he was. Across the room, Claire sat by the window, absently stirring her tea. She had curly auburn hair tied back into a loose ponytail and wore a simple sweater paired with jeans. Her warm smile lit up the room whenever she greeted someone, which she did often. Maggie, the owner of the diner, shuffled between tables, refilling cups and dropping off plates of food. She was a stout woman in her 50s with rosy cheeks and a booming laugh that could fill the entire space. "Another pancake stack for you, Hank?" she called out to the grumpy farmer sitting alone in the corner. Hank nodded without looking up, his weathered face hidden behind the brim of his hat. He wasn't much of a talker, but he came to Maggie's every morning without fail. Everything changed when the ground began to tremble slightly. At first, no one noticed. People thought it might be a truck driving too fast down Main Street. But then the shaking grew stronger, rattling the windows and making the silverware clink against the plates. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as heads turned toward the sky. A shadow loomed overhead, blocking out the sunlight. The crowd outside gasped as a massive spaceship descended gracefully. Hovering above the parking lot like some kind of metallic bird, it was unlike anything anyone had ever seen. The ship gleamed silver and gold, its surface shimmering as if alive. Strange symbols etched into the hull pulsed faintly with light, casting an eerie glow across the ground below. For a moment, there was silence, a collective holding of breaths. Everyone waited to see what would happen next. Then, with a soft whirry sound, a beam of light shot down from the bottom of the craft, touching the asphalt gently. 3 figures emerged from the brightness. Stepping cautiously onto Earth for the first time, the aliens were tall. At least 7 feet, with slender bodies covered in translucent skin that glowed faintly in the daylight. Their limbs moved fluidly, almost like water flowing in slow motion. Large almond-shaped eyes dominated their faces, dark and unreadable. They wore no clothing, yet their forms radiated a sense of elegance and purpose. One of them tilted its head, scanning the crowd with curiosity. Another raised a long, delicate hand, pointing toward the diner. People froze, unsure whether to run or stay put. Some whispered prayers under their breath. Others reached instinctively for their phones to record the moment. Jake set his coffee, mug down, and stepped forward, his heart pounding but his expression calm. "What do you want?" he asked, his voice steady despite the surreal scene unfolding before him. The tallest alien tilted its head again, studying Jake as though trying to decipher his words. After a pause, it let out a series of melodic hums that echoed through the air. Then, in broken English, it spoke. "We observe, learn." Its voice was smooth and musical, unlike anything human ears were accustomed to hearing. Claire joined Jake at the front of the crowd, clutching her purse tightly. "Do you think they're friendly?" she whispered, her eyes wide with both fear and fascination. Jake shrugged, not taking his gaze off the visitors. "Hard to say. But I don't think they'd have landed here if they wanted to hurt us." Maggie pushed open the diner door and stepped outside, wiping her hands on her apron. "Well, if y'all are going to stand around gawking, at least come inside," she said loudly, gesturing toward the building. "I've got coffee and pie if you're interested." Her boldness startled the crowd, but it also broke the tension. Laughter rippled through the group, easing some of the anxiety, to everyone's surprise. The aliens followed Maggie's invitation. They moved slowly, their glowing forms casting strange shadows as they entered the diner. People scrambled to make room, pulling chairs aside and clearing tables. The aliens didn't sit, they simply stood, observing everything around them with intense focus. Their movements were deliberate, as if every action required careful thought. When Maggie offered them a cup of coffee, the aliens recoiled slightly at the strong aroma. One of them leaned closer, inspecting the liquid with obvious curiosity. "Explain," it said, turning its gaze to Jake. Jake hesitated, unsure where to begin. It's just coffee. You drink it in the morning to wake up." He took a sip from his own mug to demonstrate, though he immediately regretted it when the aliens mimicked his movement exactly. Sniffing their cups suspiciously, Claire stepped in, sensing Jake's discomfort. "It's part of breakfast," she explained, gesturing toward the plates of food scattered across the tables. "Humans eat breakfast to start their day. It gives us energy." The aliens exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. One of them pointed to a plate of pancakes, dripping with syrup. "Purpose." Jake chuckled nervously. "To taste good, I guess." He grabbed a fork and cut off a piece, popping it into his mouth. The aliens watched intently, their heads tilting in unison. Finally, one of them reached out tentatively, picking up a fork with 2 fingers. It examined the utensil carefully before attempting to mimic Jake's actions. The result was clumsy, but effective. The alien managed to spear a piece of pancake and lift it to its mouth. For a brief moment, the diner fell silent as the alien chewed. Then, unexpectedly, it emitted a low hum that resonated through the room. It wasn't unpleasant, in fact, it sounded almost musical. The other aliens joined in, creating a harmonious blend of tones that left the humans staring in awe. "What does that mean?" Claire whispered to Jake, her voice barely audible. Jake shook his head, equally baffled. "No idea, but I think they liked it." As the morning wore on, the aliens continued to explore the concept of breakfast, asking endless questions about each dish. Why did humans fry eggs? What was the point of butter on toast? How could something as simple as cereal bring so much joy? Each answer led to more confusion, but also more curiosity. By the time noon rolled around, the diner felt less like a place of fear and more like a meeting ground between 2 vastly different worlds. Still, not everyone was convinced. The aliens' intentions were pure. Hank muttered under his breath as he paid for his meal, glaring at the glowing figures from beneath his hat. "Mark my words," he told anyone who would listen. "They're not here for pancakes." Despite his skepticism, even Hank couldn't deny the strangeness of the situation, or the undeniable charm of watching aliens struggle to understand a simple human breakfast. The diner buzzed with energy as the aliens continued their exploration of human breakfast. Maggie bustled around, refilling coffee cups and serving plates of food, while occasionally glancing nervously at her. Otherworldly guests, the aliens, 4. Their part seemed utterly absorbed in every detail. They watched as Jake cracked an egg into a sizzling pan, tilting their heads in unison like curious birds. When the whites bubbled and turned opaque, one of them emitted a soft hum of approval, or at least that's what everyone assumed it meant. Claire stood nearby, trying to explain the concept of toast. "You take bread," she said, holding up a slice, "and you put it in this machine." She gestured toward the toaster on the counter. "It gets warm and crispy. People like it because it tastes good." One of the aliens reached out tentatively, touching the toasted bread with a glowing fingertip. It recoiled slightly when the heat registered, then tilted its head again, studying the golden brown surface. "Why burn?" the alien asked, its voice smooth but tinged with confusion. Claire laughed nervously. "It's not really burning. It's just cooking. We do it on purpose. Trust me, it's delicious." To prove her point, she spread butter over the toast and took a bite, smiling brightly. The aliens exchanged glances, their expressions unreadable. Finally, one of them mimicked her actions, picking up a piece of toast and nibbling cautiously. Its reaction was immediate. A series of melodic tones filled the air, rising and falling like a symphony. The humans stared in awe, unsure whether the sound signaled delight or disgust. Jake leaned against the counter, watching the scene unfold with a mix of amusement and disbelief. "This has got to be the weirdest morning of my life," he muttered under his breath. Claire nodded, brushing crumbs off her sweater. Tell me about it. I never thought I'd spend my day teaching aliens how to eat pancakes. As the morning wore on, more townsfolk trickled into the diner, drawn by rumors of the visitors. Some came out of curiosity, others out of fear, but all were captivated by the strange sight of glowing aliens poking at scrambled eggs and sniffing suspiciously at orange juice. Children pressed their faces against the windows, giggling as one of the aliens accidentally squirted syrup onto its translucent hand. Even Hank, the grumpy farmer who had been so skeptical earlier, lingered near the doorway, arms crossed but eyes fixed on the spectacle. Maggie, ever the hostess, decided to make the most of the situation. If they're going to stick around, we might as well give him the full experience, she declared, clapping her hands together. With that, she began pulling ingredients from the kitchen: flour, sugar, chocolate chips, and set to work making a fresh batch of waffles. The smell of vanilla wafted through the diner, drawing murmurs of anticipation from both humans and aliens alike. When the first waffle emerged golden and steaming from the iron, Maggie placed it on a plate and handed it to the tallest alien, whom she had started calling Z. Here you go, she said cheerfully. Try this. Humans love it. Z studied the waffle carefully, turning it over in its delicate fingers. Then, with a flicker of determination, it picked up a fork and took a tiny bite. For a moment there was silence. Then Z let out a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the room. The other aliens joined in, their tones blending harmoniously until the diner felt alive with music. They're singing, Claire exclaimed, her eyes wide with wonder. Jake scratched the back of his neck, looking equally amazed. I guess that means they liked it? Encouraged by the positive response, Maggie kept the waffles coming. Soon, plates piled high with fluffy squares drenched in whipped cream and strawberries were passed around the diner. The aliens ate slowly, savoring each bite, their melodic hums growing louder and more complex with every mouthful. It was clear they were experiencing something far beyond mere tastes. Their reactions suggested they were connecting with the food on a deeper, almost spiritual level. But not everything went smoothly. When Jake introduced the aliens to cereal, things took a chaotic turn. He poured milk into a bowl of colorful loops, explaining how the combination created a satisfying crunch. One of the aliens reached out eagerly, dipping its fingers into the bowl. Before anyone could stop it, the alien lifted a dripping handful of cereal to its mouth and promptly dropped the entire contents onto the floor. The diner erupted in laughter, though the alien looked genuinely perplexed. Maybe next time we skip the cereal, Jake said, wiping tears from his eyes. Claire grinned, shaking her head. Good idea. Let's stick to waffles and pancakes. They seem to get those. Despite the occasional mishap, the atmosphere in the diner grew lighter as the morning progressed. Fear gave way to fascination, and skepticism softened into curiosity. The aliens, for their part, appeared equally intrigued by the humans. They watched intently as people talked, laughed, and shared meals, their large black eyes reflecting a mixture of confusion and wonder. At one point, Z pointed to a group of friends seated at a corner table where they were passing around a plate of bacon. Purpose? Z asked, tilting its head. Jake followed its gaze and shrugged. Just being together, I guess. Sharing food makes people happy. Z hummed thoughtfully, as if processing the idea. Then, to everyone's surprise, it extended a glowing hand toward the plate of bacon, offering a strip to one of its companions. The second alien hesitated before accepting, mimicking the gesture by passing the bacon along to the third. The humans watched in silence, moved by the simple act of connection. By late morning, the diner was packed. Word of the alien visit had spread quickly, attracting not only locals but also reporters and curious onlookers from neighboring towns. Cameras flashed, and microphones were thrust forward as journalists tried to capture the historic moment. Maggie shooed them away, insisting that her diner wasn't a circus. These folks are here to learn, not to be gawked at, she scolded, waving a spatula threateningly. Reluctantly, the crowd dispersed, leaving the aliens and the townsfolk to continue their peculiar breakfast ritual in relative peace. As the hours passed, Jake and Claire found themselves taking turns answering the aliens' endless questions. Why did humans drink coffee even though it tasted bitter? What was the significance of pouring syrup in spirals rather than straight lines? How did pancakes become fluffy when cooked? Each explanation led to more queries, creating a loop of discovery that left everyone exhausted but exhilarated. At one point, Za gestured toward Claire's tea, which had grown cold in her cup. Warm liquid? Purpose, it asked. Claire smiled, lifting the mug to her lips. It's comforting, she explained. When you're tired or stressed, drinking something warm can make you feel better. Z hummed softly, reaching out to touch the rim of her cup. A faint glow emanated from its fingertip, warming the tea instantly. Claire blinked in surprise, then laughed. I guess you've got your own way of doing that. The aliens' fascination with breakfast wasn't limited to food itself. They were equally intrigued by the rituals surrounding it. They marveled at the way families gathered around tables, the casual banter between friends, and the shared joy of indulging in favorite dishes. To them, these moments seemed almost magical, a stark contrast to the sterile efficiency of their own culture. There, not just learning about breakfast, Claire whispered to Jake as they stood by the counter, watching Z attempt to pour syrup onto a stack of pancakes without making a mess. They're learning about us, about humanity. Jake nodded thoughtfully, his gaze drifting to the glowing figures moving gracefully among the cluttered tables. Maybe we're learning about them too. By noon, the initial shock of the alien arrival had faded, replaced by a sense of camaraderie. The diner buzzed with conversation, laughter, and the occasional burst of melodic humming. For the first time, the humans began to see their visitors not as strange, incomprehensible beings, but as fellow explorers, creatures driven by the same desire to understand and connect. As the morning sun filtered through the windows, casting soft golden light across the room, Jake couldn't help but smile. Whatever the aliens' true intentions might be, one thing was certain. They had brought Willow Creek together in ways no one could have predicted. And for now, that was enough. As the afternoon sun filtered through the windows of Maggie's place, the diner had transformed into a bustling hub of activity. The aliens, now more comfortable in their surroundings, moved with a quiet confidence, their glowing forms casting soft light over the tables. Plates of half-eaten food were scattered everywhere, and the air was filled with the mingling scents of syrup, bacon, and coffee. Despite the chaos, there was an undeniable sense of connection growing between the humans and their otherworldly visitors. Jake leaned back in his chair, watching as Z attempted to master the art of using chopsticks. The alien had picked up the utensils with its delicate fingers, mimicking the way Claire held hers while eating sushi. It managed to grasp a piece of tuna roll, but just as it lifted the food toward its mouth, the chopstick slipped, sending the roll tumbling onto the table. Z paused, tilting its head in what looked like frustration. Then, unexpectedly, it let out a low hum that sounded almost amused. Jake chuckled, shaking his head. Don't worry, he said. Even humans take years to get the hang of those. Claire smiled, setting her own chopsticks down. We should stick to forks for now. She glanced at the clock on the wall, surprised by how quickly the day had passed. Hours earlier, they had been terrified of these glowing strangers. Now, they were laughing alongside them, sharing meals and stories. It felt surreal, but also strangely natural. The aliens' curiosity knew no bounds. Every new dish introduced sparked a flurry of questions. When Maggie brought out a tray of freshly baked cinnamon rolls, Z pointed to the swirls of icing drizzled across the top. Purpose? It asked, its smooth voice carrying a hint of wonder. Claire hesitated, unsure how to explain something so simple yet indulgent. It's sweet, she said finally. Humans like things that taste good, even if they don't need them. Z hummed thoughtfully, picking up one of the rolls with surprising care. It sniffed the sugary aroma before taking a small bite. For a moment, nothing happened, then the alien closed its eyes and emitted a series of melodic tones that resonated through the room. The sound was rich and layered, almost like a song. The other aliens joined in, their harmonies blending seamlessly. until the entire diner seemed to vibrate with music. People stopped what they were doing, listening in awe. Even Maggie, who prided herself on being unflappable, wiped away a tear. "They're happy," Claire whispered to Jake, her voice tinged with emotion. "I think they really like it." Jake nodded, watching as Z offered a piece of the cinnamon roll to one of its companions. The gesture seemed deliberate, an act of sharing that mirrored human behavior. "Yeah," he said softly. "They're starting to get us. But not." Everyone shared this newfound optimism. Hank, still seated in his usual corner, scowled as he watched the scene unfold. His plate of eggs sat untouched, growing cold in front of him. He muttered under his breath, shaking his head. "This ain't right," he grumbled to anyone within earshot. "Aliens don't just show up out of nowhere to learn about pancakes. They've got an angle there waiting for something." His words didn't go unnoticed. A few townsfolk exchanged uneasy glances, their earlier excitement dampened by doubt. One woman, a middle-aged librarian named Ruth, leaned closer to Hank. "What do you mean?" she asked nervously. "You think they're dangerous?" Hank shrugged, his weathered face grim. "Could be. Could be not. But mark my words, they didn't come all this way just to eat waffles." His skepticism spread like wildfire, reigniting fears that had momentarily faded. By evening, whispers of distrust began to circulate throughout the diner. Jake overheard some of the murmurs and frowned. He didn't want panic to spoil the fragile bond they had formed with the aliens. Walking over to Hank's table, he pulled up a chair without asking. "Look," he said firmly, keeping his voice low. "I get it, you're worried. We all are. But have you seen anything that makes you think they're here to hurt us? Because I haven't." Hank stared at him, his jaw clenched. "That's the thing, Jake. We don't know nothing about him. And that's what scares me." Before Jake could respond, Claire approached, her expression serious. "We can't let fear ruin this," she said, addressing both men. "These aliens came here to learn. Maybe we should focus on teaching them instead of assuming the worst." Her words carried weight, and after a long pause, Hank reluctantly nodded. "Fine," he muttered, "but I'm keeping an eye on M." The tension eased slightly, but it lingered in the background like a shadow. Meanwhile, the aliens continued their exploration of human culture, oblivious to the doubts swirling around them. They were particularly fascinated by the concept of dessert. Maggie had brought out slices of apple pie, explaining that humans often save the sweetest dishes for last. Z examined the pie carefully, poking at the crust with a fork. "It delay pleasure?" it asked, its tone genuinely curious. Claire laughed, realizing how odd the tradition must seem to someone unfamiliar with human habits. "It's about anticipation," she explained. "Saving the best for last makes it feel special." Z hummed thoughtfully, taking a bite of the pie. Its reaction was a meteoric cascade of melodic tones that filled the room with warmth. The other aliens followed suit, each emitting their own unique harmonies. The combined effect was breathtaking, leaving the humans speechless. As the day wore on, the aliens began experimenting with flavors themselves. Using tools provided by Maggie, they mixed ingredients in ways that defied logic. One created a concoction of whipped cream, hot sauce, and chocolate syrup, which it presented proudly to Jake. "Try," it urged, its large eyes gleaming with excitement. Jake hesitated, glancing at Claire for support. She grinned, shrugging. When in Rome, with a deep breath, Jake took a spoonful of the bizarre mixture. His face contorted instantly, and the diner erupted in laughter. "Whoa," he gasped, grabbing his coffee mug to wash down the taste. "That's creative." Elians hummed in delight, clearly pleased with their creation, even if it wasn't quite palatable to human standards. Despite the occasional culinary mishap, the atmosphere remained lighthearted. Children giggled as one alien accidentally squirted ketchup onto its glowing hand, while adults marveled at the alien's ability to adapt and learn. Even Hank cracked a reluctant smile when Z successfully flipped a pancake without burning it, a feat that earned loud applause from the crowd by late afternoon. The diner had become a melting pot of cultures, with humans and aliens working together to create new dishes. Maggie stood behind the counter, beaming with pride as she watched her little restaurant transform into a place of unity and understanding. "Never thought I'd see the day when aliens helped bake cookies," she said, shaking her head in disbelief. Yet beneath the surface, questions lingered. What did the aliens truly hope to gain from this encounter? Were they genuinely interested in humanity? Or was there a deeper motive at play? As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the room, Jake found himself wondering the same thing. He glanced at Claire, who was busy teaching Z how to frost a cupcake. Her enthusiasm was infectious, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something important. Later that evening, after most of the crowd had dispersed, Jake and Claire decided to take a walk outside. The cool night air was refreshing after hours spent in the warm, bustling diner. Above them, stars twinkled brightly against the dark sky. Neither spoke for a while, each lost in their thoughts. Finally, Claire broke the silence. "You think they'll leave soon?" she asked, her voice soft. Jake shrugged, shoving his hands into his pockets. "Hard to say. They haven't given any sign of leaving, not yet anyway." He paused, glancing back at the diner where the aliens still lingered, "But I don't think they'll stay forever. They're explorers, Claire. Just like us. Once they've learned what they came for, they'll move on." Claire nodded slowly, her gaze fixed on the ground. "I just hope we gave them something worthwhile to remember us by." Jake smiled, nudging her gently with his elbow. "I think we did. Between pancakes, waffles, and cinnamon rolls, I'd say we made quite the impression." They shared a laugh, the tension easing slightly. But as they turned to head back inside, Jake caught sight of Z standing near the edge of the parking lot, gazing up at the stars. Its translucent form glowed faintly in the darkness, and for a moment it looked almost ethereal. Jake wondered what thoughts or emotions might be passing through its mind. Whatever the answer, one thing was certain: the aliens' visit had changed Willow Creek and perhaps humanity itself in ways no one could have anticipated. As the days passed, the presence of the aliens in Willow Creek became a part of everyday life. The diner remained the center of activity, with Maggie's place earning the nickname the Galactic breakfast spot. People came from miles around to catch a glimpse of the glowing visitors who now seemed as much a fixture of the town as the locals themselves. Yet beneath the surface of this newfound normalcy, questions about the aliens' true intentions continued to simmer. Jake and Claire found themselves spending more time with the aliens, particularly Z, who had taken on the role of their unofficial leader. It wasn't just curiosity that drove them, it was a growing sense of responsibility. If these beings were here to learn about humanity, Jake and Claire wanted to ensure they left with an accurate understanding. But teaching them about human culture proved far more complicated than either had anticipated. One evening, after most of the diner crowd had gone home, Jake decided to ask Z directly. "Why are you really here?" he said, leaning against the counter. Alien tilted its head, its large black eyes reflecting the dim light. "To observe," it replied simply. "To understand." Claire crossed her arms, frowning slightly. "Understand what, though? Humans? Something else?" Z hesitated, as if searching for the right words. Then it gestured toward the empty plates scattered across the tables. "You create, you share, you connect. These actions are foreign to us." Its voice carried a note of longing, almost wistful. "We seek meaning in your ways." Jake exchanged a glance with Claire, both of them struck by the sincerity in Z's tone. For all their advanced technology and ethereal appearance, the aliens seemed oddly incomplete, like they were missing something fundamental that humans took for granted. The realization unsettled Jake. He had always thought of humanity as flawed, messy, and imperfect. But to the aliens, those very imperfections appeared beautiful. Later that night, unable to sleep, Jake wandered outside and sat on the steps of his garage, staring up at the stars. The spaceship still hovered silently above the diner, its metallic surface gleaming faintly in the moonlight. It was hard to believe that such an enormous, mysterious vessel contained beings who were struggling to make sense of something as simple as breakfast. As he sat there, lost in thought, Claire joined him, wrapping a sweater tightly around her shoulders. "You okay?" she asked, sitting beside him. Jake shrugged, picking at a loose thread on his jeans. I keep thinking about what Z said earlier, about seeking meaning. Do you think we're giving them what they need? Claire sighed, brushing a strand of curly hair out of her face. I don't know, maybe. But I can't shake the feeling that there's more to it. They're so different. What if we're misunderstanding them as much as they're misunderstanding us? Her words lingered in the cool night air, heavy with uncertainty. The next morning, Jake and Claire decided to take matters into their own hands. If the aliens wanted to understand humanity, they needed to see more than just breakfast routines. They needed to experience the full scope of human life. With Maggie's blessing, they organized a small festival in the town square, inviting everyone to participate. There would be games, music, food stalls, and even a bonfire. It was risky, given the lingering suspicions among some townsfolk, but Jake and Claire believed it was worth the effort. When the day of the festival arrived, the entire town turned out. Colorful banners fluttered in the breeze, and the smell of grilled corn and barbecued chicken filled the air. Children ran around, laughing, while adults mingled and chatted. Off to one side, a local band played lively tunes on guitars and fiddles. The aliens stood at the edge of the square, observing everything with quiet fascination. Jake approached Z, motioning for it to follow him. Come on, he said. This is part of who we are too. Shh. Z hesitated before stepping forward. Its companions closed behind. Together, they ventured into the heart of the celebration. At first, the aliens seemed overwhelmed by the noise and energy. The music, especially, drew their attention. One of them reached out to touch the strings of a guitar, eliciting a surprised laugh from the musician. Another watched intently as children played tug-of-war, tilting its head when the rope snapped. Taut. When someone handed Z a stick topped with fluffy pink cotton candy, it examined the treat curiously before taking a tentative bite. The resulting burst of melodic tones suggested it approved. Claire guided another alien toward a booth where people were painting pottery. She handed it a brush dipped in bright blue paint, encouraging it to try. The alien hesitated, then began tracing delicate patterns onto a clay bowl. Its movements were precise, almost artistic, and the result was stunning, a swirling design that looked like galaxies colliding. The crowd gathered around, murmuring in admiration. For the first time, the aliens weren't just observers, were participants. But not everything went smoothly. During a game of sack racing, one of the aliens accidentally tripped over its burlap sack, tumbling to the ground. Laughter erupted from the spectators, though it quickly turned to concern when the alien emitted a series of discordant hums. Jake rushed over, worried it might be hurt. Instead, he found the alien lying on its back, emitting low tones that sounded suspiciously like laughter. Soon, the other aliens joined in, their harmonies blending into a joyful symphony that echoed through the square. Even Hank, who had been sulking near the edge of the crowd, cracked a reluctant smile. Guess they ain't so bad, he muttered. To no one in particular, Ruth, standing nearby, patted him on the arm. Told you they were harmless. As the sun set and the bonfire was lit, the mood shifted. Flames danced in the darkness, casting flickering shadows across faces young and old. Someone started singing a folk song, and others joined in, their voices rising and falling in harmony. The aliens listened intently, their glowing forms swaying gently to the rhythm. Then, unexpectedly, they began to hum along, their tones weaving seamlessly into the melody. The effect was mesmerizing, a blend of human and alien voices creating something entirely new. For a moment, fear and doubt melted away, replaced by a profound sense of connection. Jake glanced at Claire, who was smiling softly, tears glistening. In her eyes, "They get it," she whispered. "They really do." Yet even as the festival brought people together, it also raised new questions. Later that night, as the fire burned low and the crowd began to disperse, Jake noticed Z lingering near the edge of the square. It was staring up at the stars, its expression unreadable. Walking over, Jake sat down beside it. "What are you thinking about?" he asked quietly. Z didn't respond immediately. When it finally spoke, its voice was tinged with sadness. "Your world is fleeting, beautiful, but fragile. We have seen many civilizations, yet none like yours. You live fully, despite knowing your time is limited. Jake frowned, unsure how to respond. Yeah, well, that's kind of the point, isn't it? Knowing our time is short makes us appreciate it more. Z hummed thoughtfully, its glow dimming slightly. Perhaps. But such beauty comes at a cost. Your emotions, your connections, they are powerful, but they leave you vulnerable. The weight of Z's words settled over Jake like a heavy blanket. He had never considered humanity's fragility as anything other than a flaw. Now, hearing it described by an outsider, he realized it was also their greatest strength. Before he could say anything, Z rose gracefully to its feet. Thank you, it said, bowing its head slightly. You have shown us much. The next morning, the spaceship was gone. There was no warning, no farewell, just an empty space where it had hovered for days. The townsfolk gathered in the diner, sipping coffee and speculating about what had happened. Some felt relieved, while others were saddened by the sudden departure. Jake and Claire sat quietly at their usual table. Processing the events of the past week, they learned what they came for, Claire said finally, breaking the silence. Jake nodded, stirring sugar into his coffee. Yeah, and maybe we learned something too. Though the aliens had vanished without a trace, their impact on Willow Creek remained. The festival became an annual tradition, drawing visitors from neighboring towns. Stories of the glowing visitors spread far and wide, inspiring wonder and curiosity. And in the hearts of those who had shared meals, laughter, and music with the aliens, a lasting bond endured, a reminder that even in the vastness of the universe, connection was possible. As Jake left the diner that morning, he glanced up at the sky, wondering if the aliens were out there somewhere, humming melodies inspired by human songs. Whatever their journey held, he knew one thing for certain: they would carry a piece of Willow Creek with them. Just as the town would forever remember the aliens who couldn't comprehend a simple human breakfast. The days following the aliens' departure felt strangely quiet in Willow Creek. The absence of their glowing forms and melodic hums left a void that no one quite knew how to fill. Maggie's place, once bustling with activity, returned to its usual routine, though the diner now bore subtle reminders of the visitors who had transformed it into the Galactic breakfast spot. A framed sketch of Z flipping pancakes hung on the wall near the counter, drawn by a local artist as a tribute. Plates bearing swirling designs painted by the aliens were displayed proudly on shelves, each piece a testament to the brief but profound connection between two vastly different worlds. Jake found himself spending more time at the diner, even when there was no real reason to be there. He would sit at his usual spot by the window, nursing a cup of coffee as he stared out at the empty parking lot where the spaceship had hovered just days before. Claire joined him often, her presence a comforting constant amid the lingering uncertainty. They rarely spoke about the aliens directly, but their shared silence carried an unspoken understanding that something extraordinary had happened, and life would never feel quite the same again. One afternoon, as the lunch rush wound down, Maggie approached their table with a plate of freshly baked cookies. "You two look like you're carrying the weight of the world," she said, setting the plate down with a clatter. "Eat something. I'll make you feel better." Jake managed a weak smile, picking up a cookie half-heartedly. "Thanks, Maggie, but I don't think cookies can fix this one." Maggie crossed her arms, raising an eyebrow. "Oh, nonsense. If those aliens came all the way here just to learn about us, then they must have realized something important. Maybe it's time we figured out what that something is." Her words lingered in Jake's mind long after she walked away. What had the aliens truly taken from their visit? And what had humanity gained in return? These questions gnawed at him, urging him to dig deeper. That evening, as twilight settled over the town, Jake suggested to Claire that they pay a visit to Hank. Though the grumpy farmer had softened somewhat during the festival, he still harbored doubts about the aliens' intentions. Jake thought his perspective might offer valuable insight. Hank greeted them warily when they arrived at his farm, leaning heavily on a pitchfork as he eyed them suspiciously. "What do you two want?" he asked gruffly, though his tone lacked its usual bite. Jake held up his hands in a gesture of peace. "Just wanted to talk, Hank, about the aliens," he snorted, shaking his head. "Thought they'd cleared out." "Already? What's left to say?" "A lot, actually," Claire chimed in, stepping forward. "We've been thinking Maybe we didn't fully understand why they were here, or what they were looking for. Hank studied her for a moment, his weathered face softening slightly. You think they weren't telling us everything? Nodded. Exactly. They kept saying they wanted to observe and learn, but about what? Exactly? Humanity? Or something else? The three of them stood in silence for a while, the only sound the rustling of leaves in the breeze. Finally, Hank sighed, lowering the pitchfork. All right, fine. Let's say you're right. What are you planning to do about it? It was a good question, one Jake and Claire hadn't fully answered yet. But as they drove back to town later that night, an idea began to form. If the aliens had come to learn about humanity, perhaps the best way to honor their visit was to reflect on what made humans unique, to celebrate not just breakfast or festivals, but the essence of human existence itself. The next morning, Jake called a meeting at the diner. Word spread quickly, and soon the small space was packed with townsfolk eager to hear what he had to say. Standing at the front of the room, Jake cleared his throat nervously. We all know the aliens came here to learn about us, he began. But maybe it's time we learned something too about ourselves, about what makes us human. Claire stepped forward, picking up where Jake left off. We're thinking of creating a kind of journal, record of our experiences, thoughts, and feelings. Something we can share with anyone who wants to understand humanity, including the aliens, if they ever come back. The idea sparked immediate interest. People began brainstorming ways to contribute. Recipes, stories, photographs, sketches, even recordings of music. Ruth, the librarian, volunteered to oversee the project, offering the town hall as a workspace. By the end of the week, the community had rallied around the initiative, pouring their energy into documenting every aspect of life in Willow Creek as the journal took shape. Jake and Claire found themselves revisiting moments from the aliens' visit. They included photos of Z attempting to pour syrup without making a mess, sketches of the glowing beings experimenting with flavors, and transcripts of conversations translated into simple, heartfelt language. Each entry was accompanied by reflections from the contributors, capturing the emotions and insights inspired by the encounter. One evening, as Jake flipped through the growing collection of pages, he paused at a drawing of the bonfire festival. The image depicted the aliens swaying to the rhythm of human voices, their forms blending seamlessly with the crowd. Beneath it, Claire had written a note. Connection isn't about perfection, it's about sharing something real. Her words resonated deeply with Jake, reminding him of Z's final comment about humanity's fragility. Perhaps that vulnerability, the willingness to embrace imperfection, was what the aliens had found most compelling. It wasn't just the food or the laughter or the music. It was the courage to live fully, despite knowing that nothing lasts forever. The project brought the town closer together, fostering a sense of unity that extended beyond the diner. Neighbors who had once kept to themselves now exchanged stories and ideas, eager to contribute to the journal. Even Hank submitted a page, featuring a photograph of his prized pumpkin patch, alongside a short essay about the importance of hard work and resilience. Guess it's not such a bad thing to let folks see the real you, he admitted gruffly when Jake thanked him. By the time the journal was complete, it had grown into a vibrant mosaic of human experience, bound in leather, and embossed with a design inspired by the aliens' swirling patterns. It was placed on display in the town square for everyone to admire. Copies were sent to libraries and schools across the region, spreading the story of Willow Creek far and wide. Yet Jake and Claire couldn't shake the feeling that the journal wasn't meant solely for human eyes. Late one night, they drove out to the edge of town, where the spaceship had last been seen. Carrying the original copy of the journal, they stood beneath the stars, gazing up at the vast expanse of sky. What if they don't come back? Claire asked softly, clutching the book to her chest. Jake hesitated, then smiled. Doesn't matter. We did this for us, too. For remembering who we are and who we can be. As they turned to leave, a faint shimmer caught Jake's eye. Above, a streak of light arced across the heavens, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. Whether it was a shooting star or something more, neither could say. But in that moment, standing side by side, under the endless night sky, they felt a spark of hope, a belief that somewhere out there, the aliens were humming melodies inspired by the fleeting beauty of human life, and perhaps, just perhaps, they would return someday to hear the rest of the song. Months passed, and life in Willow Creek settled into a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. The journal remained on display in the town square, its pages worn from countless hands flipping through them. Children pointed excitedly at the sketches of glowing aliens, while older residents reminisced about the days when the visitors had wandered among them. Though the aliens themselves were gone, their presence lingered, not just in the stories and artifacts they left behind, but in the way they had changed how the townsfolk saw themselves. Jake and Claire continued to meet at Maggie's place, though their conversations now revolved more around daily life than cosmic mysteries. Still, there were moments when Jake would glance out the window, half expecting to see the shimmering form of Z stepping out of thin air. Claire noticed these pauses and smiled softly, knowing exactly what he was thinking. "You really miss them, don't you?" she asked one morning, stirring cream into her coffee. Jake shrugged, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "Not sure if I miss them or just wonder about them, what they're doing, where they've gone." Claire nodded thoughtfully. "What do you think? They'll ever come back?" "I don't know," Jake admitted. "But part of me hopes they do. Not because we need answers, but because I feel like we owe them something. Thank you, maybe." Their musings were interrupted by Maggie, who bustled over with plates of pancakes and bacon. "Enough talking about Spaceman," she said briskly, setting the food down. "You two should focus on the here and now. Besides, ain't no alien gonna tell us how to live our lives?" Her words carried a ring of truth, and for a while, Jake and Claire let themselves be swept up in the simplicity of small-town routines. They helped organize community events, volunteered at the local shelter, and even started teaching cooking classes at the diner. Yet beneath the surface of these activities, a quiet longing persisted, a desire to reconnect with the beings who had opened their eyes to the beauty of human imperfection. Then, one crisp autumn morning, something extraordinary happened. As Jake was driving to work, he noticed an unusual glow on the horizon. At first, he thought it was sunlight reflecting off clouds, but as he drew closer to the edge of town, the source became clear. The spaceship had returned. Word spread quickly, and within minutes, the entire town had gathered in the field where the vessel had landed. This time, however, the atmosphere was different. There was no fear, no panic, only anticipation. When the aliens emerged, their translucent forms shimmering faintly in the golden light, Jake felt a surge of relief. Z led the group, its large, black eyes scanning the crowd until they locked onto Jake and Claire. "You came back," Claire said, her voice trembling slightly. Z tilted its head, emitting a soft hum. "We promised." The aliens moved with purpose, heading straight for the town square. There, they stopped in front of the journal, which had been encased in glass to protect it from the elements. Z reached out, touching the cover gently. Its companions joined in, their glowing fingers tracing the swirling patterns etched into the leather. "This is your gift?" Z asked, turning to Jake and Claire. Jake nodded, struggling to find the right words. "It's everything we wanted to share with you. Everything we learned about ourselves because of you," Z hummed thoughtfully, its tone resonating, with a depth that seemed almost emotional, more than we expected. It paused, then gestured toward the ship. "Come, we wish to show you." For a moment, the crowd hesitated. Then Jake stepped forward, followed closely by Claire. Together, they approached the spaceship, their hearts pounding with a mix of excitement and uncertainty. The threshold. The interior revealed itself to be a vast chamber filled with holographic projections in distant planets, civilizations, and cultures. But amidst the swirling galaxies, one projection stood out. Earth.Z guided them to. The image, which depicted scenes from Willow Creek, the diner, the festival, the bonfire, each frame pulsed with light as if alive. "Your world is unique," Z explained. "Fragile, yet resilient. Chaotic, yet harmonious. You have taught us the value of impermanence." Claire blinked back tears, overwhelmed by the realization that their small town had left such a profound mark on these otherworldly beings. "And you've taught us to see ourselves differently," she said softly. "To appreciate what we have." Before leaving, The aliens presented the townsfolk with a gift of their own, a crystalline device that emitted a soft, melodic hum when activated. Inside the crystal, a miniature galaxy swirled endlessly, casting prismatic reflections across the room. A reminder, Z said simply, of connection. When the spaceship ascended into the sky once more, the crowd watched in silence, their faces illuminated by the fading glow. Once a long time afterward, no one spoke. It was as if the weight of the moment required stillness, a collective pause to absorb the significance of what had transpired in the weeks that followed. Life in Willow Creek resumed its usual pace, but the impact of the aliens' second visit rippled through every corner of the town. The crystalline device was placed in the center of the square, becoming a symbol of unity and hope. People gathered around it often, sharing stories and laughter as the tiny galaxy danced above them. Jake and Claire found themselves reflecting on the experience more deeply than ever before. One evening, as they sat together on the steps of the diner, Jake broke the silence. "Do you think we'll ever see them again?" Claire smiled, her gaze fixed on the stars. "Maybe, or maybe not. But does it really matter? They're part of us now, just like we're part of them." Her words stayed with Jake long after they went their separate ways that night. He realized that the aliens' true legacy wasn't in the memories they left behind or the lessons they imparted, was in the way they had inspired humanity to embrace its flaws, its fleeting nature, and its boundless capacity for connection. As winter settled over Willow Creek, blanketing the town in snow, the crystalline device continued to emit its gentle hum. Children pressed their faces against the glass, marveling at the swirling galaxy within. Adults paused in their busy lives to admire its beauty, reminded of the day when strangers from another world had shown them the extraordinary in the ordinary, and high above. Among the stars, the aliens journeyed onward, carrying with them melodies inspired by human voices and images of a little town where breakfast was more than just a meal, was a celebration of life itself.